So every year for the last few years, for whatever reason, I get to do the roundup of Symposium Gitex, because I think that the great thing about Symposium every year is it's the point at which Sitecore articulate their strategy, their view of the world, their kind of mental model of how they see the world and how they're going to develop their product. And I think that's meaningful, and I think it's interesting to see how that evolves each year. And I think especially this year, after, as Gonzalo was talking about, the success of sort of Gitex as a statement for the region, I think it's again, the right time to actually say, well, what has Symposium taught us about the future strategy of the product that we all co-evolve with as partners, as purchasers of that software, brands. What does this actually mean? And this is my personal view. So, no doubt afterwards you'll want to sort of, criticize and disagree with it. This year has been so momentous in a change of direction, really, and a clarity of proposition, that what I want to take you through is a very simple timeline of how I see that evolution, right? Trust me, I'm only going to be speaking for a few minutes. So look, the first time, when Sitecore comes out, 20 odd years ago, it says, look, there's this kind of need to manage content better on websites. And that kind of makes sense, and that's cool, and it had a CMS, and it didn't try to do anything else. It just said, we're going to do this thing. And then it said, but actually, we should start to do more than just manage the content. This is massively oversimplified, but it started to say, we should get involved in this whole digital marketing automation, and this whole thing about customer experience at some point came up to say it's more than just content, it's more than just a function, but it's about orchestrating customer experience. Trust me, I'm going somewhere with this. And then it acquired Microsoft Server about 8-9 years ago, because it moved from this position of saying, we're just going to do this thing, to actually broadening out to say, we're going to do everything. We're going to be one platform to rule them all. And this was a common theme at the time with Sitecore and those other platforms that dare not speak their name. And about 4 years ago, it made a very different type of acquisition, which you'll all know about. And this was really substantively different, I think, in terms of the direction of Sitecore. So if these two, if XP, the CMS, and the kind of XC, they were almost one platform. You can't buy XC without XP. It's an addition to it. And this is all about, we will transform your customer experience. But Content Hub was all saying, we will transform your marketing department. It was fundamentally different. And that brings us to Steve, who, even though he doesn't say it on his profile, actually lives in Dubai. Hopefully, Mohammed, I'm allowed to say that. And Steve, when he joined, wanted to understand, what does that direction look like? How does he take Sitecore even further? And this is my interpretation of what he's done. And at exactly the same time, around about the same time, Gartner released this very influential report, which you may have seen, where I believe they coined the expression composable DXP. And if there is an expression to define a strapline, to define the way that Sitecore now see the world, it is composable DXP. And you should read this. And let me just read this. It says this in summary: application leaders, i.e. Sitecore, cannot meet market needs or business objectives with monolithic digital experience platforms, and must update tech stacks, decompose monoliths, and deliver task-oriented capabilities. To future-proof the stack, a composable DXP must be used to deliver composable user experiences. And they have this great quote, they have a bunch of them, they have this great estimate in there to say that those organizations that actually embrace a composable approach will be able to get new features implemented 80% quicker. So this whole idea is like a microservices piece. And this also aligns with this Mac architecture, this kind of view of the changing nature of what people want. And this, I think, has coined the kind of direction of travel for what Sitecore are trying to achieve. And so obviously, spend it like Steve. Sitecore raised 1.2 billion and have been on a acquisition spree this year because they are trying to, bring in all of these composable elements and at the same time move away from this idea of one platform to actually multiple points of entry into the Sitecore ecosystem. And this is a fundamentally, different view. Now, I'm going to do two things. I'm going to give you the two ways of thinking of this composable DXP, right? And then I'm going to shut up. The first way is somewhere I've completely ripped off from Symposium, which I think was the most useful slide in all of the Symposium presentations. and it attempts to try and define what do all these things do and how do they play together. What does this vision look like from content to commerce, and what are the points of differentiation for Sitecore? Hopefully you can see that correctly. So if you think about there's delivery, there's commerce, there's experience, content, and platform. There is still a traditional PaaS offering still available on premise, but you've now got a SaaS offering, consistent with Mac architecture. So you can still take, you can't see that, but there's XC, XP, XM, and effectively XDB and XP. You can still go for that, and that will still be right for some clients. And most of the clients probably, the traditional clients still have this architecture. But then you get this new suite of tools, many of which are those acquisitions that have been rebranded. And you'll all have seen these, and we can talk about them afterwards if you want. But this whole idea that actually now there's this kind of, SaaS, API first, headless, and modern code-driven new platform offering just a much deeper and much more nuanced and much more modularized view of the Sitecore stack. And this is fundamentally different from this kind of, do you want XP? And there's some stuff you can add on if you want. But my last slide, I'm going to explain that stack in a way that makes more sense to me, right? And this may or may not work, right? So I've taken, is Hirsch here? Hirsch not here. So I've taken any random stranger image. So imagine this is a customer. Let's just call her Hirsch. And this customer has many different screens, okay? So they've got, phones and emails and different things. And then there's a company that has many different products. And what they're essentially going to try and play is a massive game of Tinder. They need to try and match Hirsch with the product that she wants and not match her with the products that she doesn't want. I mean, that really is essentially what marketing is, right? And so what does Sitecore do? Sitecore say, well, look, if I'm the company and I've got these products, I'm going to need some transactional capability because, heaven forbid, COVID, we can't even transact online, or whatever it might be, you need to be able to transact. So there's a commerce component, predominantly the order cloud acquisition, traditionally XC. And then they say, right, we need somewhere to put content as well. And that's sort of the content hub proposition. And that, of course, also has things like a PIM in it, which plays nicely with the commerce and the product information. And has a whole bunch of other stuff you can do in terms of content strategies. This is kind of containing and the content and the management. And of course, traditionally, all way back in the day, they're like, yeah, okay, well, we also need to be able to manage that content. We need to be able to stick that onto various different channels. And that's the XM proposition, but it's now in the cloud. And I think it's important to understand that XM is the future of content management, beyond XP. And of course, because it's headless now, what they're going to do is they're going to say, well, when we're managing this content and all of these products, we want to be able to put them on any device or any screen that Hirsch may have contact with, and we want to be able to join all that up. And in order to do that, this whole kind of headless range, you've got this whole kind of front-end code as a service, which I think is a really interesting piece, and it fundamentally transforms the way I think you actually sort of develop for many of these screens and many of these channels. And of course, one of those pieces of functionality you're going to want to build is Hirsch is going to want to be able to search and sort of merchandise, and the whole reflection acquisition I think is really important to especially when it comes to commerce. So there's that build. And then there's the missing piece, which is the thing that Sitecore is probably most famous for, of course, which is personalization. But in order to do personalization, and in order to do this other thing, which is the kind of the marketing automation piece, that heaven forbid should Hirsch leave something in a basket and not want to actually not check it out, then we're going to want to obviously bombard her with emails and text messages or whatever else we're going to want to do in a very intelligent, joined up, omni-channel way. In order to do that last piece around personalization and marketing automation, we really need to understand Hirsch. So what we need to do is we need to create the company will need to create that kind of digital twin, that single view of customer, which ultimately is going to look something like that in some database. And the place that sits and the tool that does that is the CDP, which I think, for me personally, is the most important development of the recent acquisitions, the most important piece of how Sitecore are changing and think about themselves. And this, essentially, is how all of the different components come together. I mean, you'd be surprised to say that's not a logical architecture. But this is, to me, makes much more sense in terms of thinking about how all of these different things can come together. And of course, it's important to realize it's API first, so all of these things play very nicely together. And of course, it's composable, which means you don't have to have them all. You can start at any point. You can start with CDP. You don't even need CDP. You can take the personalization offering and use that with a non-Sitecore stack, of CMS. There's a whole range of different combinations you can have. And that is, in less than 10 minutes, my view of what Symposium taught us about how Sitecore is seeing the world and how what I think is what they're doing and what Steve has seen is a future, and they've been able to get Sitecore out ahead of composable DXP in a way that no other competitor platform has done. And I think it's been remarkable, really, to be honest with you. And it would be interesting to see exactly how that works.